If you are listening to this late at night, take a slow breath. Let your shoulders fall. There is nowhere you need to be right now. Nothing you need to fix. Nothing you need to become before the next few moments pass. The world is quieter at this hour, not because problems disappear, but because expectations loosen their grip. And in this space, when the noise steps back, your own thoughts tend to speak more clearly. Most people spend their days running from this moment. They fill every silence. They keep something playing, something scrolling, something talking back to them, because silence has a way of revealing what effort tries to hide. But tonight, you are here, and that matters more than it sounds. Tomorrow's Sagittarius moon brings movement, not the loud kind, not the kind that announces itself. It brings an inner restlessness, a subtle pull toward meaning, toward honesty, toward the question you keep postponing. Not, what do I want to do, but who am I becoming while no one is paying attention? Most growth begins long before it becomes visible, long before results, long before confidence, long before anyone says your name with respect. There is a phase, rarely spoken about, where effort produces nothing obvious, where discipline feels pointless, where consistency feels invisible, where the only proof you're changing is that you feel tired in a different way. This is where most people stop, not because they fail, but because they don't receive confirmation. Quitting is usually quiet. It doesn't look dramatic. It looks like sleeping in just once, skipping a day just this week, lowering the standard just a little, explaining it away with logic that sounds reasonable, and no one notices. That's the dangerous part. No one notices when you give up because the world is not watching closely enough to stop you. Discipline is built in that privacy, not in motivation, not in inspiration, but in the absence of applause, in the hours that feel unimportant, in routines that don't feel heroic. You begin to learn something uncomfortable, that progress does not announce itself. It accumulates silently, like pressure underground. And if you stay long enough, something shifts. You stop asking how long it will take. You stop needing reassurance. You stop explaining yourself to people who were never meant to understand. This is when identity starts to form. Not the identity you show, the one you rely on. There's a loneliness that comes with this phase, a specific kind. Not the loneliness of being abandoned, but the loneliness of walking a path fewer people choose. Your circle changes, sometimes without conflict, sometimes without closure. Conversations feel repetitive. Old jokes stop landing. You notice how often people talk, but how rarely they build. And at first, you wonder if something is wrong with you. It's not. You are outgrowing environments that were built for an older version of you, and growth rarely feels comfortable while it's happening. Most people think strength arrives as confidence, but real strength arrives as restraint, as patience, as the ability to sit with discomfort without immediately escaping it. You learn to move quietly, not because you are hiding, but because you no longer need permission. Silence becomes a tool. You stop oversharing. You stop arguing. You stop trying to win conversations that cost more energy than they're worth. You start saving that energy. And slowly, very slowly, self-trust begins to replace external validation. Self-trust doesn't feel exciting. It feels steady. It feels boring to people who chase highs, but it lasts. It shows up when motivation disappears. It carries you through days when nothing feels meaningful. It keeps you moving when results lag behind effort.
This is where repetition matters. Not dramatic repetition, not extreme routines, just showing up again and again and again. Doing the small thing even when it feels insignificant, especially when it feels insignificant. Because significance is usually recognized in hindsight. At some point, you realize you are no longer waiting to be seen. You are building whether or not anyone is watching. And that changes how you walk through the world. You become harder to distract, harder to impress, harder to derail. Not because you are rigid, but because you are anchored. There will still be doubt. It doesn't disappear. It just loses authority. You learn that doubt is not a signal to stop. It's a signal that you're operating at the edge of your comfort zone. And comfort is where growth goes to sleep. The Sagittarius moon tomorrow doesn't demand action. It invites reflection. It asks you to look honestly at what you've been avoiding and what you've been quietly building. It reminds you that freedom is not found in doing whatever you want. Freedom is found in discipline you choose. Chosen discipline becomes identity. Unchosen discipline feels like punishment. You begin to see the difference. Most people want change without disruption. They want growth without loss. They want evolution without letting go of familiar versions of themselves. But becoming stronger requires subtraction. Fewer explanations, fewer excuses, fewer dependencies. You don't announce this shift. You don't need to. The strongest transformations are internal first. There's a calm that arrives when you stop chasing immediate proof, when you accept that the quiet years are not a delay, they are the work. These years build the spine, the resilience, the capacity to stand alone if necessary. And one night, much like this one, you notice something subtle. You're not anxious in the silence anymore. The stillness doesn't threaten you. It supports you. Your thoughts feel slower, clearer, less urgent. You understand now why so few people make it through this phase. Because it requires faith without evidence, effort without applause, and patience without a timeline. But you stayed. And staying, quietly, consistently, is how strength is formed. As you rest tonight, let that settle. You don't need to rush the process. You are already inside it. Tomorrow will come, and with it, another small chance to continue. Not loudly, not dramatically, just honestly. Breathe, and let the night hold the rest. As the night deepens, there is a certain honesty that only appears when the world is asleep. During the day, you perform without noticing. You respond, you react, you adapt. You become what the moment requires. But at night, performance dissolves, and what remains is quieter, heavier, more real. This is usually when the mind drifts backward to unfinished thoughts, unanswered questions, moments you handled better in your head than in real life, choices that still echo, not loudly, just persistently. Most people distract themselves here. They reach for something to drown this out. But if you stay with it, if you let the silence speak instead of fighting it, you begin to understand something important. Growth is not a single decision. It is a long series of moments where you choose not to abandon yourself. That sounds simple, but it isn't. Because abandoning yourself is easy. It often looks responsible. It looks practical. It looks like choosing comfort over alignment, approval over truth, short-term peace over long-term respect. And no one calls it quitting when it happens slowly. You just drift. You drift away from standards you once cared about. You drift away from effort that once felt meaningful. You drift away from the person you knew you could become. not suddenly, quietly. This is why discipline has nothing to do with force. Real discipline is not harsh, it is not aggressive, it is gentle and persistent. It's the voice that says, "I'll do it anyway," not because I feel like it, but because I said I would. Self-trust is built exactly there, not when conditions are ideal, but when they aren't. You begin to notice how frequently your mood tries to negotiate with your values, how frequently it suggests postponement, delay, exceptions. Just tonight, just this week, just until things feel better. And sometimes listening to that voice feels harmless, until you realize how many times it has redirected your life. There is a moment.
As the hours move deeper into the night, time begins to feel different, less urgent, less demanding. This is when the mind stops racing forward and starts settling in to what is actually true. There is a version of you that only exists in these quiet hours. Not the version shaped by reaction, not the version shaped by expectation, but the one that shows up when no one needs anything from you. This version is more honest. It notices the fatigue that has been accumulating, not just physical fatigue, but the kind that comes from holding yourself together for too long, from staying composed, from staying consistent, from doing the right thing even when it feels unseen. That kind of effort leaves a mark, not on the outside, on the inside. And yet, this is also where strength is refined, because real strength is not loud. It doesn't denounce itself. It doesn't rush. It stays. Most people underestimate the power of staying. They believe change comes from bold moves, from dramatic decisions, from visible action. But most lives are shaped by what you do repeatedly when no one is paying attention. The nights you go to sleep a little disappointed in yourself, but not enough to quit. The mornings you wake up without excitement, but still follow through. That is where identity is built. You begin to understand something subtle. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your standards. And standards are not loud promises. They are quiet habits. They are how you treat your time when no one is watching, how you speak to yourself when you make a mistake, how quickly you return to discipline after disruption. Because disruption is inevitable. You will lose momentum. You will doubt your direction. You will question whether this quiet effort is worth it. That doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're human. The difference is what you do next. Do you spiral or do you reset? Resetting is an underrated skill. It doesn't require motivation. It requires humility. The ability to say, "I drifted, I'm back." No punishment, no drama, no overcorrection. Just return. This is how long-term consistency is maintained. People imagine discipline as rigidity, but rigidity breaks. Flexibility endures. You learn to bend without abandoning your direction, to adapt without losing your center. That takes time. And time is the one thing most people refuse to give themselves. They want proof quickly. They want validation early. They want reassurance before commitment. But this process asks for the opposite. Commit first, trust later. That trust grows slowly. At first, you don't believe in yourself fully. You just believe in the process enough to continue. That's sufficient. Belief does not need to be absolute. It just needs to be stable. Over time, as days stack on top of days,
you begin to notice a shift in how you move. You're less reactive, less defensive, less interested in proving anything. You stop narrating your life to others. You stop seeking permission to be serious. You simply are. This is often misinterpreted. Some people will think you've become cold, detached, uninterested. In reality, you've become selective. You've learned the cost of emotional noise. You've felt how distraction fragments focus, and you've decided, quietly, to protect what you're building. That protection looks like boundaries. Not spoken ones, lived ones. You don't announce them, you enforce them through behavior. You leave earlier. You respond less. You say no without explanation. At first, this feels uncomfortable. You've been conditioned to accommodate, to soften, to stay available. But availability has a cost, and when you finally feel that cost clearly, you stop paying it blindly. This doesn't make you selfish, it makes you responsible. Responsible for your energy, your direction, your future self. Future you is depending on what you do in these quiet seasons, not in grand gestures, in small, unremarkable choices. Choosing rest instead of numbing. Choosing consistency instead of intensity. Choosing honesty instead of approval. These choices rarely feel heroic. They feel ordinary. And that's why they work. Ordinary effort compounds. Extraordinary effort burns out. You don't need to push harder. You need to stay longer. Stay with the discomfort. Stay with the uncertainty. Stay with the process when it feels repetitive. Repetition is not stagnation. It is refinement. Each pass through the same routine, you bring a little more awareness, a little more precision, a little less resistance. And slowly, almost without noticing, you become someone who can be relied on. Not by others, by yourself. That is a rare form of confidence. It doesn't speak. It doesn't posture. It doesn't rush. It rests. It allows you to move through life without constantly checking for approval, without needing reassurance at every step. You trust yourself to adjust if needed, to recover if you fall, to continue if things get quiet again. And they will. There will be more quiet nights like this one. More moments where progress feels invisible. More stretches where nothing seems to change. That doesn't mean nothing is happening. Roots grow in silence. As you listen now, let that idea settle. You don't need to rush the outcome. You don't need to force clarity. You are already doing the most important part. You are staying. Breathe slowly. Let the night hold your thoughts. There is nothing you need to solve right now. Just rest here and allow tomorrow to arrive when it's ready. The night has a way of softening things. Edges blur. Urgency fades. What felt heavy during the day becomes quieter. Not gone, just less demanding. This is often when you begin to feel the distance between who you were and who you are becoming. It doesn't arrive as a sudden realization. It's more like a quiet noticing. You react differently now. You pause where you used to rush. You listen where you used to defend. You let things past that once pulled you into unnecessary effort. At first, this can feel like losing something. You were once fueled by urgency, by pressure, by the need to prove you were moving forward. But urgency is a temporary fuel. It burns hot, and then it disappears. What replaces it is steadier, intentional movement, calm direction, a sense that you don't need to rush to arrive. This is when patience stops feeling like waiting and starts feeling like preparation. Preparation is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand recognition. It simply accumulates. You begin to understand that timing matters more than speed, and that arriving too early can be just as dangerous as arriving too late. Most people exhaust themselves trying to force outcomes. They push before they're ready. They expose plans before they're stable. They speak before they've listened long enough. You learn restraint instead. Not out of fear, out of clarity. You speak when there is something worth saying. You act when there is something worth committing to. Until then, you observe. Observation sharpens perception. You notice patterns in people, how often they repeat the same complaints, the same cycles, the same justifications. You realize how rarely most people change direction, even when they're unhappy. Change requires discomfort, and discomfort is usually avoided at all costs. But you've learned something now. Discomfort is not an enemy, it's a signal. It tells you where growth is possible. You don't chase discomfort for its own sake. You simply don't run from it anymore. That shift alone separates you from most. There is a calm confidence that comes from knowing you can sit with.
The night continues its slow movement forward, not rushing, not waiting, just passing. This is usually when thought becomes softer, less structured, more honest. You're not trying to solve anything right now. You're just letting awareness drift across what's already there. And in that drifting, you may notice how much you've changed without realizing it. The old urgency doesn't grip you the same way. The need to explain yourself has faded. The impulse to react immediately has softened. These are not losses. They are signs of integration. You are no longer living in fragments. One version for work, another for survival, another for approval. You are becoming consistent across environments. That consistency is quiet power. It means you don't need to adjust who you are based on who is watching. Your internal standards are enough. This didn't happen overnight. It was built in ordinary days, in private effort, in moments where you could have chosen comfort and didn't. Not because you were forcing discipline, but because discipline had already become part of you. This is an important shift. When discipline is external, it feels heavy, restrictive, temporary. When discipline is internal, it feels natural, supportive, sustainable. You no longer need to motivate yourself aggressively. You simply return to what you do, and return again. There will still be days when energy is low, when clarity feels distant, when the process feels longer than you expected. Those days are not interruptions. They are part of the rhythm. You've learned not to panic when momentum slows. You don't abandon direction just because the pace changes. That patience is rare. Most people interpret any slowdown as failure. They assume intensity must be constant. But intensity is not sustainable. Rhythm is. You work, you rest, you reflect, you adjust, then you continue. This cycle doesn't look impressive from the outside, but it builds endurance. Endurance allows you to stay long enough for meaningful change to occur. And meaningful change is always slow. It reshapes how you see yourself, how you respond to pressure, how you measure progress. You stop measuring days, you start measuring seasons. A difficult week no longer defines you. A quiet month no longer discourages you.
You trust that consistency will carry you through fluctuations. That trust frees mental space. You're no longer constantly evaluating yourself, grading your performance, second-guessing your direction. You know where you're going, not in detail, but in principle. And principle is enough to guide action. There is a calm certainty that comes from alignment. It doesn't need evidence every day. It's reinforced by repetition. You begin to enjoy the simplicity of showing up, not because it's easy, but because it's clean. No excess, no noise, no unnecessary struggle. Just effort applied where it matters. This clarity changes how you handle pressure. Pressure no longer feels personal. It's not a judgment of your worth. It's simply a condition. You respond to it pragmatically. You do what you can. You leave what you can't. This emotional economy preserves energy. Energy that used to be wasted on worry, on comparison, on unnecessary explanation. Now it's available for building. And building doesn't need urgency. It needs consistency. You've also learned something important about loneliness. Not all loneliness is a problem to solve. Some of it is a transition, a space between identities, a pause between who you were and who you are becoming. In this space, you shed attachments that no longer fit, old expectations, old narratives, old definitions of success. This can feel empty at first, but emptiness is not absence. It's room. Room for depth, room for intention, room for a more honest version of your life. You don't rush to fill it anymore. You let it be. And slowly, new meaning forms. Not borrowed, not imposed, chosen. Chosen values, chosen direction, chosen effort. These choices anchor you. They don't shout, they don't perform, they simply hold. As the night moves toward rest, let yourself recognize this. You are not lost. You are in a quieter phase of becoming. This phase does not ask for answers. It asks for presence. Presence with your breath, with your body, with the moment you are in right now. Nothing needs to be fixed tonight. Nothing needs to be rushed. You've done enough for today. Allow the weight of effort to settle. Let the mind loosen its grip. Sleep is not escape, it is restoration. And restoration supports continuation. When morning arrives, you will return to the process. Not dramatically, not urgently, just steadily. For now, rest here. Let the night finish what it started. The night feels deeper now, as if the world has fully stepped back. There is less demand in the air, less expectation. Only the slow rhythm of time continuing without asking anything from you. This is often when awareness becomes more physical. You notice the weight of your body, the pace of your breathing, the quiet signals you usually ignore. Your body has been carrying you through long days, through effort that didn't always feel rewarding, through discipline that required more patience than excitement. And it never complained loudly. It just adapted. There is a lesson in that. Adaptation is quiet strength. Most people mistake strength for resistance, for pushing harder, for refusing to bend. But endurance comes from cooperation, from listening, from adjusting without abandoning direction. You've learned to do this with your life. You no longer push against every feeling. You allow them to pass through without letting them take control. Tiredness arrives. You rest instead of numbing. Doubt appears. You acknowledge it without obeying it. This is emotional maturity. It doesn't announce itself. It simply changes how you move. You're more patient with delays, more measured with reactions, less tempted by shortcuts that promise speed at the cost of stability. Shortcuts always charge interest later. You've seen that clearly now. Every avoided discomfort returns with weight. Every postponed responsibility grows heavier over time. So, you choose the slower path. Not because it's easier, because it's honest. Honesty has a calming effect. When your actions align with your values, there is less internal friction. You're not constantly negotiating with yourself, not rationalizing, not justifying. You do what you said you would do. And when you don't, you correct quietly and move on. This simplicity frees mental space. Space to think clearly, to plan realistically, to notice what actually matters. You become less interested in extremes. Extreme productivity, extreme positivity, extreme ambition. Extremes burn fast and leave little behind. You prefer balance. Balance doesn't look impressive. It looks consistent. It allows you to show up tomorrow, and the day after that, and the one after that. That continuity builds something rare: reliability. You know you can rely on yourself, not perfectly, but generally. And generally is enough. Because life doesn't require perfection. It requires presence. Presence allows you to respond instead of react, to choose instead of escape. You've also become more comfortable with uncertainty, not because you enjoy it, but because you've learned it's unavoidable. Uncertainty is not a flaw in the process. It is the process. Waiting for certainty is waiting forever. So, you move with incomplete information. You decide with humility. You adjust when reality provides feedback. This approach keeps you grounded. You're no longer attached to being right, only to being honest. That honesty extends inward. You're less harsh with yourself now. You don't demand constant progress. You don't equate rest with laziness. You understand cycles. Effort has seasons. So does recovery. Ignoring recovery doesn't make you stronger. It makes you brittle. So, you respect your limits. Not as excuses, but as information. Information allows intelligent adjustment. This is how long...
The night is very still now. The kind of stillness that feels wide rather than empty. Nothing is asking for your attention. Nothing is pulling you forward. This is where the mind finally loosens its grip. Thoughts come more slowly. They arrive without urgency. They leave without resistance. You don't need to follow them. You can just notice. In this space, you may sense a quiet acceptance forming. Not resignation, acceptance. The difference matters. Resignation feels heavy. It carries defeat. Acceptance feels calm. It carries clarity. You accept where you are without needing it to be different tonight. That acceptance removes friction. It allows energy to settle instead of scattering. Most people never learn this skill. They live in constant negotiation with reality, always wishing something were different, always pushing against what already is. That resistance drains them. You've learned another way. You work with reality, not against it. When something can be changed, you change it. When it can't, you adapt. This simple distinction saves immense energy. Energy that stays with you now, quiet, available. You've also learned that identity is not declared, it's demonstrated. Not once, but repeatedly, in small, unremarkable ways. Who you are is how you behave when no one is checking, when there is no immediate reward, when the outcome is uncertain. You don't need to tell anyone who you're becoming. The work speaks quietly on your behalf. There is a freedom in that. Freedom from image management. Freedom from comparison. Freedom from chasing recognition. Recognition arrives when it's ready.
or it doesn't. Either way, you continue. This detachment is not indifference, it's focus. Focused people don't waste energy on what they can't control. They invest in what they can, their habits, their responses, their direction. You've narrowed your attention over time, not because your world shrank, but because it became clearer. You know what matters to you now. Not everything, just a few essential things. That simplicity brings peace. You no longer feel pulled in a dozen directions. You move with intention, and intention stabilizes emotion. You're less reactive to setbacks, less inflated by wins. Both are temporary. What lasts is your commitment to the process. Process over outcome. Outcome is noisy. Process is quiet. Quiet lasts. You've also become more comfortable with being misunderstood, not because you enjoy it, but because you no longer need to correct it. Most misunderstandings resolve themselves over time. If they don't, they weren't meant to. You don't carry the burden of explanation anymore. That burden was never yours to carry. You let people see what they see. You stay focused on what you know. This internal stability shows up subtly in how you speak, in how you pause before responding, in how you choose your words carefully or choose silence instead. Silence is not absence, it's restraint. Restraint creates space. Space allows wisdom to surface. You don't need to react immediately to everything. Urgency is rarely real. You've learned to wait. Waiting is not passivity, it's preparation. It allows the full picture to appear. Then you act without regret. This patience changes your relationship with time. Time is no longer something you're chasing. It's something you're using. One day at a time. No rush, no panic, just presence. As this stillness deepens, you may feel the body sinking further into rest. Muscles release. Breath becomes quieter. There is nothing to hold up anymore. You've done enough for today. Tomorrow's effort does not need tonight's worry. Worry solves nothing in this hour. Rest solves much. Rest integrates what effort builds. You are allowed to stop now, to be still, to be quiet, to let the mind drift without direction. The path will still be there when you wake, and you will return to it, without force, without doubt, just continuity. For now, let the night carry you. You don't need to stay alert. You can trust the process, even as you sleep.